This is the brand new derailleur and shifter offering from WheelTop. We went ahead and tested version 1 already, and actually between testing version 1 and posting the video for it, they launched this, which is version 2 of the derailleur. So let's get this thing opened up. Same kind of nice packaging that we are used to from WheelTop, just like the old one. Very neat, tidy. Got the derailleur here. We have our shifter, which is actually identical to the old one. The same charger that the old one utilizes as well. So most notable changes to this, I mean, obviously aesthetically, it looks a ton better in my opinion. Have the version 1 right here, kind of do a side-by-side comparison, but version 1 definitely looks dated, not quite as refined. Version 2, much cleaner, industrial design in my opinion, just looks better overall. Weight about the same. We're gonna go ahead and get this on a scale right now and compare weights. All right, version 2, 408 grams. Version 1, 404 grams. So pretty much identical, 4 grams. So this thing still has the same 800 milliamp hour battery that the version 1 has. Besides that, it utilizes the same app to get everything set up and micro-tuned. So the most notable changes to this derailleur are the fact that it now has a updated clutch. This derailleur feels much tighter than the version 1. I think the clutch is also adjustable, which is great. That was one of my complaints about the version 1, was that the clutch was not tight enough. That's not a good start. We are 5 feet into the trail and my chain is off. Another change that we see with the version 2 is that it has a narrow-wide pulley wheel on the bottom. Another issue I ran into with the version 1 was actually getting the chain caught between the cage here and the pulley, and I think a lot of that was due to the lack of a narrow-wide pulley wheel on the bottom. On the version 1 that I have here, I actually went ahead and pulled a SRAM X0 pulley wheel that I had. So I went ahead and replaced that and no longer had the issue of the chain falling off in between the pulley wheel here. This derailleur I took off my bike a few weeks ago, and I'm super excited to get this thing mounted up and see how it does. I'm not gonna go through a full installation video. If you guys are interested in the full installation video, we'll go ahead and leave a link up here for that. I'm really more just interested to see how this thing rides on the trail and overall how it performs. This time I'm going to be mounting this derailleur to my Canyon Torque, and I'm going to actually be heading out to the East Coast to do some riding out at Highland Bike Park and some surrounding trails. So yeah, we're hopefully gonna get this in a bit of wet weather, as well as just a lot of bike park chatter, which will bring out any weakness that this derailleur has. So let's get to the trail and get testing. Okay, so I lied, well, sort of. We are in the garage getting this thing installed and just wanted to go through a couple of things. So I just pulled off this plastic cover, which is held on by a single bolt. One of these is the clutch adjustment and one is the high limit screw. And then the low limit screw is tucked way back in here. So a little different than the old one, very non-traditional in that sense. But WheelTop has a pretty simple guide on their website, so we're just following that along to get this thing tuned. We're also putting it on this bike, which has a SRAM cassette, so it's a little different than previous one that I used a Shimano cassette with. But besides that, setup has been pretty straightforward, about the same as the old one. So as I mentioned in the intro, I pretty much got this derailleur mounted up and took it straight across the country to New Hampshire to do some riding out at Highland Mountain Bike Park. When I got there, greeted with plenty of rain and mud, so this derailleur pretty much instantly went into some rainy conditions, and with those conditions and washing the bike, pretty much never had any issues with this thing dropping connection, stopping working altogether, or anything like that. So definitely passed the mud test. So I had it mounted on this bike the whole time. When I initially started the test, I had a fan guide mounted on this bike. However, just on the final day of testing, I went ahead and took that thing off, and to my surprise, the chain never came off, unlike the version 1 where I pretty much dropped the chain instantly. I also never had the issue that I had with version 1 of the chain falling between the cage and the pulley wheel. So one of the features that you get with the version 2 over the version 1 is the race mode. You can go in the app and select either race mode or casual mode. Race mode pretty much allows you to hold either the up or down shifter and shift through all your gears without having to individually keep clicking gears. I pretty much never found myself using this. If I did use it to actually go from an easier gear into a harder gear, I kind of just found the derailleur grinding really bad. The only time I could maybe see using this would be if you're coming bombing down a big hill straight into a steep uphill where you have to change from a super hard gear to a super easy gear in as short a time as possible. Maybe that's a case where you could use it, but you definitely don't want to do it under power because it just grinds and kind of claps out your chain and your cassette. So compared to the version 1, with the version 2, I mounted it on a different bike, and this bike has a SRAM, this is a 10 to 52 cassette. To get this thing originally set up, you put it in the hardest and smallest gear, closest to the frame, and you hit your initial calibration. That's where you get your gear 1 set, and as long as your 12-speed option is selected, then you can pretty much program that first gear, and it should theoretically go through all the gears pretty well. Fortunately, with WheelTop, they allow you to actually fine-tune each individual gear also. So if you do have a different cassette that needs a little micro adjustment done, let's say gear 5 is shifting kind of weird or skipping, but just gear 5 is, you can actually go into the app, select gear 5, and make your adjustment just for that one gear, not affecting any of the other gears. I got this thing shifting pretty well on the bike stand. However, when I took it off of the bike stand and went to pedal it around, sometimes that consistency wasn't quite the same. One issue that I ran into with this was to set my B tension, I put it in the easiest gear, closest to the hub. WheelTop recommends an 8 to 10 mil B gap. So what that means is your gap from your cassette to your pulley wheel should be about 8 to 10 mil. If I set mine even on the upper end of that at 10 millimeters, if I shifted all the way down into my hardest gear and went to pedal, I actually saw that the derailleur was making contact with this part of the frame right here. Because of the design of this frame, it hangs down a bit lower. Maybe with hardtails or full suspension bikes that have a slightly different rear linkage design, you might not run into that issue, but I could not physically put this bike at the 8 to 10 mil recommended gap. And I was also getting pretty significant slack in my chain when trying to set it to that 8 to 10 mil gap. So another change from version 1 to version 2, the shifter is actually almost identically the same, besides the fact that there is now a button on the back of the shifter, and that allows you to fine tune without having to go into the app. So let's say I was setting this derailleur up for the first time. Default, I believe it comes set to 12 speed. So I'm getting it mounted on my bike. It's set to 12 speed already. Without having to open the app, I can go into my smallest gear and micro tune it via just the shifter and get it set. Theoretically, it should shift pretty well. Of course, if you have to make any of those fine tune adjustments, then you're gonna have to go in the app to do that. But it should at least get you at a good starting point. Battery life on this thing still as good as the old one. I never found myself having to charge it pretty much the whole time I used it. I had no issues with losing connection, as I mentioned at the beginning. I also never dropped the chain, which was not the case with version 1. However, for me, the hardest part to get past is just those inconsistent shifts. Maybe if I had a different cassette mounted on this, that would be a different story. Possibly if I mounted it to a different bike or a hardtail where I could actually achieve that 8 to 10 mil gap that they ask for with setup. However, there's a lot of improvements on this derailleur. I believe that this derailleur is free from all the tariffs going on. It actually ships from the US, according to their website. So you should be able to get your hands on one of these. I believe they're selling on the website now, as we're making this video, derailleur and shifter for $370, which is a pretty insane deal. And it's cool. I think it's the only derailleur on the market where you can adjust how many cassette speeds you have. So you could set this up with a 9-speed, 10-speed, 11-speed cassette, 7-speed if you really wanted. There's plenty of options there. You can really fine-tune each cassette. So yeah, lots of cool things with this derailleur. I don't know if they need to put a tighter spring on this to have it go down gears. Like I was mentioning, I was having a hard time getting it to shift consistently, especially when dropping down the cassette. I tinkered with it quite extensively to really try and solve that problem. But still today, I'm getting occasionally inconsistent shifts. There's times where it shifts no problem. It drops down into the gear I need it to. And then there's some times where I hit it, I hear it beep, and just no shift happens. Sometimes if I go to grab 2 gears instead of 1, it pretty much always goes down 2 gears. However, it seems to struggle occasionally just shifting down 1 gear, especially around gear 4 to 5 is where I found the problem. So with the shifting inconsistencies that I had with this derailleur, it's hard for me to give it the full nod of approval. But I want to know from you guys, any of you guys ridden these derailleurs and had much more positive experiences with shift performance? Make sure you drop a comment down below if that's the case. If not, make sure you give a thumbs up, subscribe, and for more news and reviews, make sure you head over to vitalmtb.com. See you guys in some future videos. Thanks for watching.